Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to the 31st episode of Cold War 2.0 with our dear friend, Tarik Cyril Amar. Tarik, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm fine. How are you, Kevork?
I'm good. Today I was organizing this stream, and there is a lot to unpack today with you. I'm really excited to hear your thoughts, especially about Ukraine, the tariff war, which is still ongoing between China and the United States, and also the AI war between China and the United States. But at the beginning, you sent me an article, or you told me about a development in the US, and that is the Supreme Court in the US questioned US President Donald Trump's authority to use emergency powers to impose a sweeping tariff on trading partners around the world. Now, consider me a 15-year-old person who knows nothing about nothing. What has the Supreme Court said about Trump's trade tariffs, and what authority does the Supreme Court have over Donald Trump to intervene in such manners? If you could please explain.
Yes. So this was a hearing, a very important hearing, however, before the Supreme Court. And as your viewers, our viewers probably know, the Supreme Court consists of 9 judges. 6 of them are currently categorized usually as conservative. Tendentially, they are friendly to Trump, let me put it very bluntly. And 3 of them are still categorized as what the Americans call liberal, which means for our purposes, they're not necessarily on Trump's side, but rather against him. So he has, as it were, Trump and the Republicans, his party, in general, have the sympathy of this court very much on their side, right? But what has happened now is very interesting because the Supreme Court is hearing complaints against his tariff policy by American complainants, right, who suffer from it in one way or the other. For instance, representatives of small businesses, right? And the issue at stake boils down to really one law. There is a law that Trump has used to build most of his tariff authority that he has exercised since the famous, infamous Liberation Day of 2nd April, when he started imposing these tariffs. He has built that basically on one law, most of it. There are some exceptions, but the core law is actually from 1977, and it's called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And what it really says, the first thing one should perhaps explain is that this law never talks about tariffs. It doesn't, right? It's not actually a law about tariffs at all. And the word tariffs does not occur in this law, right? It's a law that was designed to give the American president very specific powers to interfere in the economy in the case of an international emergency. So what Trump has done is he has stretched this law in 2 ways. First of all, he has said our trade deficit, which we have been running for years, if not decades, is now an emergency. That's the first thing that is incredible, right? If you've been living with something for so long, how can it be an emergency? Most normal people don't consider that an emergency. That doesn't make sense. But the second thing is even more egregious. He has simply used this law to then pass these tariffs, and not only to pass them or impose them really, but to also then play around with them. Up, down, right? We know how good old Trump.
Yes.
Now, the court says, the complainant says, the complainants against this habit of Trump say a tariff is a tax.
Yes.
And the court agrees. This is a very important point. The court agrees a tariff is a tax. And the fundamental, perhaps the most fundamental power that under the American constitutional system is reserved for Congress, not the president, only Congress, only that branch, the legislative, is the power to tax, And that means what is essentially at stake here is a very strong suspicion that by using this particular law to enact these tariffs, Trump has usurped powers that definitely, but really definitely, do not belong to his branch of government, the executive, the presidency in this case. What's interesting is that although, as I said at the beginning, the court is generally very sympathetic to Trump, which I find extremely problematic, the surprise is that in this first hearing, the court has behaved in a way, it has questioned Trump's representative in such a way that indicates that it's very possible that a majority of the judges, including very conservative ones, in this case, may decide against Trump, may decide against Trump. And if that happens, then not all of it, because some other laws were also in play, but if that happens, a large part of this whole tariff trade war that he has been waging would collapse, because it would have been illegal, even by American standards. Right?
So what would happen? What would happen? Like our friend is asking, if the court decides tariff is illegal.
Yeah, that gets very interesting. So a number of things may happen. Look, first of all, let me stress, I don't want to mislead our viewers by not being clear enough about this. The court hasn't decided yet. It hasn't decided yet. We may still be surprised. What has happened for now, but this has been reported by every newspaper I've read in the same manner, by Economist, I think, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, FT, they all picked up on this in the same way. So the message seems to be clear. What has happened is that the court seems to side with the complainants and against Trump, seems.
And those complainants are American companies.
They're Americans, yes, of course, who feel damaged by these tariffs that affect them as taxes, right? So if the court sticks to that, if the court actually should decide against Trump's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, then a large part of what Trump has done becomes illegal and has to be abandoned, as at the very least. There even is a question if, in such a case, countries who were affected by these tariffs would then have some sort of right to be reimbursed. This is not very clear. Right? I mean, we know the Americans, before they reimburse anybody outside their own country. That's still a long way off. But it is a theoretically possible thing. Here's a second aspect I forgot to mention, but it needs to be mentioned. I know this sounds all very boring, but it's actually really important.
It is not boring at all. It's very interesting, actually.
One thing that the court judges used to challenge Trump's representative was that they said, look, in general, a tariff is a tax. The president doesn't have the right to impose a tax. That's a very dangerous thing. Then he would be a king. Why did we make a revolution not to have a king, right?
Yes.
So then they asked Trump's representative, tell us, is this meant to generate money, revenue? And that poor guy, right? That poor guy, he knows exactly that he's talking nonsense, but he hadn't got another chance. He said, no, it's not meant to generate revenue. The revenue is incidental. You see where this is going, right? So the argument is we are not after the money, as a state is when it collects taxes, right?
Yes.
We are just after the political effect. And the revenue happens by accident.
Okay, so what is the political effect in theory in this case?
But wait a minute. We have to explain what the problem is. The problem is that Trump, Lutnick, Bessent, everybody who has anything to say in the Trump administration has been going on for more than half a year about how much money the tariffs will make. So this is not going to be bought by the court. Absolutely not. This is ridiculous. Now, the political effects, of course, that Trump would argue, and his people, to answer your question, is that there is a strategy here to rebalance not only trade, but the manufacturing bases of the international economy, where ultimately this is all about bringing manufacturing home to America and so on and so on. That calculus is extremely dubitable anyhow. But Trump won't get anywhere, and his representatives won't get anywhere with the argument about revenue because they only have themselves to blame. They have been telling everyone that it's about billions in revenue, even trillions over the years. So that's not flying.
Yes.
If the court ultimately decides against Trump, if that should happen, not only will a number of these tariffs have to be abandoned. They're no longer legal. They're simply not legal. Not only will there be even a question if somebody needs to be paid some sort of, some sort of compensation, maybe also inside America, right?
Yes.
No, the other question is that Trump would certainly not give up.
Hmm.
But he would then have to go to Congress, and he would work in a very different way to impose or get through his tariff strategy. And it might get much harder for him because now think about what just happened. We had several elections in America, not just Mamdani in New York. We had Virginia, New Jersey. You can even count California. It wasn't an election. It was basically plebiscite on one of their propositions. But we had New Jersey, Virginia, New York were the important ones. In all three cases, the Republicans got trounced. They've didn't get a foot on the ground in this little cluster of elections. And everyone agrees. Mamdani is sort of considered a radical, not in my book, but the people who challenged Trump in New Jersey and Virginia were not radicals. They were very moderate. So that's not the common denominator. Yes. Everybody agrees the common denominator is cost of living. It's the fact that American households are so strapped for money. Yes. And everybody knows, including in the Republican Party in Congress, that one of the reasons for this effect is actually the tariffs, is the trade war. So if Trump has to go back to Congress, to all these Republicans and say, now I want to do the same thing, but you have to help, he may have a very hard time, actually.
Tarik, before I move to a different topic in Ukraine, what is your take on Mamdani's victory? I have seen socialists and communists celebrating it on X, including people who are very radically anti-imperialist. I was myself a little bit surprised, to be honest.
Look, I mean, if you ask me personally, and that's really the only way in which I can answer this, right? If I were an American, which I'm not, and if I, were at home in New York, I would have voted for him. But not out of enthusiasm, but because, there was nothing better definitely on the ballot. And why not try? That would have been my reason to vote for him. But I don't have high hopes. I would be very happy to be surprised positively. Absolutely. And I think he deserves obviously a chance to show that he's genuine, right? But I will not celebrate at this point. I don't know when that point might arrive, but certainly not now, because the real test comes now. The real test comes now. The real test in the American system is not the election. That's the mistake everybody made with Ocasio-Cortez. The real test is what happens if they actually win an election as outsiders or apparent outsiders. Will they be co-opted? Will they be made to adjust to the rest of the system, very simply put, or not? And
hasn't this been already tested, Tarik? Hasn't been this tested already by with Sanders and with AOC, as you already mentioned?
Yes. No, I agree with you. That's what I was going to say. Up until now, everybody has been co-opted. What I'm saying is, if we look at him as an individual case, strictly speaking, we don't know the outcome in his case. But look, to be even more pessimistic, I really see two possibilities. And that doesn't mean they're the only ones that exist. I'm not that arrogant. But I see two. And one is he will surprise us and will not adjust. He will not be another Ocasio-Cortez, betraying everyone. And they seem to be friends, which for me is a bad sign already. and the other possibility is he will adjust. He will adjust, and that will be that. And there's a third one I should mention. He will not adjust, but if he doesn't adjust, then he will come under so much pressure that he will be taken apart, one way or the other. The federal government has many ways of making a city like New York miserable.
Yes, I agree.
And if Mamdani should really rebel and keep rebelling, as he has rhetorically, if he should really do it in practice as mayor, I think the federal government will treat New York for a long time like excrement, shit, until the pain gets too much. This has already happened in the 70s once. You know, President to New York was a famous headline in the 70s once, croak and die, right? Essentially the federal government saying, I'm done with you, city, you know? That's the way in which you can destroy a mayor you really don't like.
Yeah.
But to get there even, we first would have to see Mamdani sticking to his guns. And I'm skeptical. I'm not convinced. Not yet.
I am more simple than you, Tarik. I am so simple in judging people, especially when I see his wife being very long-time supporter of the Jolani terrorists in Syria. So when I see these things, I'm already on the other side. I'm not taking into this game of Rashida Tlaib, AOC, Bernie Sanders, playing the same neocon games, neocon game in certain places and then opposing in other places. I'm an easy person. I like consistency when you pretend to be someone objecting the let's say the system, and he comes from the system. Like he's the product of the system, right? And that's why if I had the chance to vote, of course, I'm not going to vote who is this? like there is nothing that you like, not even when he speaks the first word, I'm like, stop, khalas. I don't want to vote for you. You know, I mean, at least Mamdani is capable of sending messages, communicating with the people. He's one of these younger generation going to parties and participating in demos, etc. So of course he's doing great job on social media as well. So definitely I thought that he will win, but the meltdown was great after he won the elections, especially by the people who I myself, I was fascinated by the amount of propaganda calling him a jihadist. Like, this guy has nothing to do with any sort of jihadism. He's a very liberal person. I can't even call him a Muslim because what he believes in is definitely doesn't fit in an Islamic scripture. So he's a very liberal person, American person. Anyways, my dear friend, a lot is ongoing also in Ukraine. It seems that this week there was a leaked EU report which used unusually harsh diplomatic language about Ukraine's corruption and even hinted at probation status for candidates. Does this signal that Brussels has already decided Ukraine will never become a full EU member, just as NATO membership was quietly buried, and is now preparing the public for a long-term managed retreat from its own promises?
Yeah, you know, that would be one possibility. I wouldn't go quite so far at this point because I don't think that the European Commission is that reasonable, right? Simply retreating from the project of making Ukraine a full member would actually be smart. And they're not very smart, and they tend to be more insane than that. So I don't think we're there yet. But if I were in Kiev, if I were part of Zelensky's team, I would definitely be worried, right?
Yeah.
Because this report that has now been published, that was officially published, I think, as dated 4th of November. And of course, some people had it earlier. This report is a very tricky business. It has over 100 pages. And when you read it quickly, you think, oh, this is all pretty nice, right? It's a specific report on Ukraine and how Ukraine has been doing, as it were, on its way towards full membership. Maybe we should repeat here, before I forget it, that Ukraine has been an official member candidate since summer 2022, right? So this happened shortly after the escalation of the war. So Ukraine is an official candidate. I think they became candidates at the same time as Moldova, which is also interesting. And then there are a few others which joined candidate status at another time. I think it's more or less 6, more or less half a dozen. Now, when you look at the specific report on Ukraine, as I said, it looks pretty nice as long as you don't read it too thoroughly. But if you pay close attention, there is one really, if you and Kiev, worrying passage in there. And that speaks about notable concern about ensuring the ongoing, something like, I'm paraphrasing now, ongoing struggle against corruption.
Yes.
This may sound harmless, but it's not, because corruption is one of Ukraine's regime's worst flaws.
Yes.
So when they're picking up on this, they're picking up on something very, very big, and they know it. Secondly, out of Kiev, you got these celebratory Facebook posts and similar things, right? All the same. But they're all saying, this is such a great report. Everybody loves us. Everything is hunky-dory. No, it's not. Because the way you really have to read it is, look, the report is obviously written to depict Ukraine as good as possible, to shed a light as positively as possible on Ukraine at this point. And yet, nevertheless, even these authors couldn't avoid the reality of corruption.
And that is very bitter reality.
It is extremely bitter, and that message did get across to people in the West. For instance, Politico saw it at once, and they're right.
Yes.
That is the most important message of this report.
Yes.
Now, the other thing here is, look, Ukraine was really lured into this proxy war role for the West with two big promises. Two big promises. One was, if enough of you die fighting Russia, so we can take it down, we the USA and NATO, then in the end, in some vaguely defined future, we will give you NATO membership. It is now clear, although they're still being ambiguous officially, but it's totally clear that NATO is not going to keep this promise. That thing is gone, right?
Yep.
Promise number one, gone. The second big promise was, oh, by the way, in 2014, you got a special associate status, that's true, but you want full membership. And again, if you do what we want, if you are our proxy, nobody said it that clearly, but that was the deal. If you are our proxy against Russia, in the end, we will let you into the EU as well as a full member, which is where the real goodies are, right? And if Zelensky has learned anything from the NATO fiasco, he should have learned that you cannot trust promises like this, that Western elites are absolutely capable of using a country up, squeezing it dry like a lemon, and then throwing it away, because they've already done it over NATO.
But have they done it deliberately? This is a serious question. Have they done it deliberately? Because you remember in 2022, peace was very close between Russia and Ukraine, but this has been sabotaged by Boris Johnson and the Brits.
Here's what I think they have done deliberately. If you think about people like Stoltenberg, Johnson, Biden, Merkel, the Germans, Scholz at the time, and so on, right? You go through these elites in the West. Collectively, I would say they had to know that the promise of NATO membership was not serious, that they were not in a position to actually promise that. That they had to know. So at the time when they promised, they overpromised deliberately.
Yes.
Now, I'm putting it in such a complicated way because I'm trying to say there were probably a lot of people who were really insane enough in the West to genuinely want Ukraine in NATO. Yes, there were such people. But even they should have known that them wanting it and them being able to promise it as a certainty were two different things, right? And even they overpromised. And all of this helped lure Ukraine into this meat grinder of a war and keep it in there. right?
Yeah.
And then Boris Johnson 2022 fits that story as well, of course. Now, nobody sees this, but it's not so dissimilar with the EU promise. I'm not saying that the Ukrainians won't get in the EU. They might actually get in, maybe in a very strange deal that helps end the war and will be horrific for the EU, right? But hey, good for Ukraine, whatever is good. But I think what they know in Kiev, when they're honest with themselves, and they will never tell us this publicly, is that it's not certain. That in spite of the promises, in spite of the candidate status that they already have, it's not certain. And that if the EU ever wants to open the back door and get out, one topic it would certainly massively deploy is Ukrainian corruption.
True.
And it is very interesting that that's the one they've already brought up. Now, the probation period, one more thing, right, as you mentioned it, that apparently concerns all of them. And Moldova has already complained bitterly as well, right? That exemplar of democracy and electoral manipulation. So the probation period there, the idea is that in the future, maybe they would let new countries in as full members, but they can still be kicked out for a few years if they don't behave well. So that idea is idiotic, right? We all understand that idea is idiotic, right? Here's the thing. You tell me, I let you into a great British club on the mall, right? And then you tell me you have to wait 2 years until you get into the club and you have to behave really well. And I behave well, right? I behave well. And then you tell me, and now once you're in, you have to behave well for another year. And only then, when we have tested you, can you stay. Okay, I behave well for another year. So then it's 3 years, and after 3 years, I can do what I want, exactly as I could before this whole thing after 2 years, right? This whole thing is idiotic. It can't even work. The probation period thing is idiotic, right? But what's really interesting is how Zelensky reacted to it, because he reacted to it extremely in a hypersensitive and short and thin-skinned manner. And this is typical Zelensky style. You know, this man and his political survival and his regime are 200%, I can't put it differently, dependent on the Europeans now. They used to be 100% dependent on the US and 100 on the Europeans. Now they're 200% dependent on the Europeans, right? And what does he do when the Europeans say to him, not we don't want you, for which they have every reason in reality, but they say to him, you know what, a corruption thing, we don't really know. And also maybe when you get in, maybe you have to wait an extra few years because you can do again whatever you want. His answer is no. No. When we get in, we get full status immediately. That's his style. That's his style. Right?
Tarik, there is also another issue, and that is Zelensky's increasingly hostile behavior toward EU leaders like Viktor Orban, for example, combined with his refusal to address this corruption. So is Zelensky's confrontational diplomacy, along with his domestic centralization of power, actually undermining Ukraine's last remaining Western reward, turning the EU against him at the worst, let's say, possible time?
You know, we have seen that over the last years, really, since, I would say really since 2022, this has become very, very clear that the whole style of Ukrainian diplomacy is anti-diplomacy. It's not just Zelensky, it was Kuleba, it's basically everybody. The idea of Ukrainian diplomacy is to scream at others, to say, give me, without a please, and never to say thank you, and to expect that everybody has to do what you want because you're Ukraine and you're fighting against Russia and that makes you a saint or something, right? That is the style of Ukrainian diplomacy. I've summed it up, but I've not exaggerated. So Zelensky is just one of these people. And what I find interesting is that by now he should have learned that it can backfire. It has backfired, I'm sure, a lot of times behind the scenes without anybody noticing from outside. But it backfired publicly when Trump came in and Zelensky met him for the first time and was humiliated by Trump and J.D. Vance, precisely over that issue, about which they were totally right. They were basically telling him, you have no respect, you have no gratitude, we've had it with you. And they were right. They were damn right about this. Now, after that, they shifted their ground again, and then again, and then again, and they're probably not done yet, right? It's USA under Trump. But nevertheless, it happened. And Zelensky should have learned that this very simplistic style that he has in foreign policy, which is always asking for everything now, is counterproductive. Now, the perverse thing about attacking people like Orban above all, right?
Yes.
Is that Orban is, of course, a member of the club. Orban
Yes.
is in the club, right? He's among the 27 members of the EU. They may not like him there, but he's in, right?
Yes.
And that means two things. He has the absolute right to veto Ukraine's admission. It's not
Yes.
called a veto, but de facto it's a veto. Because as with NATO, every single member has to agree to accept a new member. Every single one. You miss one, you can't get in. And this is why Zelensky is so angry. In addition, Orban is actually has been trying to build a little coalition of those who resist the admission of Ukraine. And although I cannot stand Orban on many things, for instance, on Gaza, which is where he's absolutely horrible,
Yes.
I have to say that his opposition, or Hungary's opposition, also that of the foreign minister Szijjártó, to Ukraine joining the EU is perfectly reasonable. In that respect, he's the only reasonable guy in the EU, except there are some others, but they're all hiding behind him, right? He plays that role. He's the icebreaker, right? But there are others who don't actually want Ukraine in. Now, Zelensky's frustrated, right? And that's why he gets so aggressive. But think about this. Zelensky is a president. He should really, on occasion, learn to handle his emotions other than by lashing out. And what does he? He's lashing out again.
But why is it allowed for Netanyahu to demand Western governments to support him and not Zelensky? I mean, he's seeing Israel receiving everything they need.
Because of a totally different relationship with the US. That's what it is, isn't it? Look, let me put it like this. You're raising an extremely interesting question, and this is I believe that this is one of the most telling comparisons you can make nowadays about how the international system actually works. Because I think that people like Zelensky are totally aware of this difference, and they are so envious. This is what Zelensky wants. This is why he behaves this way. He wants to be like Netanyahu. He wants to have the same insane privileges Netanyahu has. And Zelensky cannot live with the fact that Ukraine isn't Israel and that it will never be Israel, and that whereas Israel is in this very strange relationship with the US, where, yes, it's a tool of the US, but the US is also a tool of Israel. It's really mutual by now. It's a symbiosis, and a very toxic one. That Ukraine doesn't have. Ukraine is a tool, and it does not control the US the way that Israel has actual control over very important parts of the political process and the culture and the media in the United States. That's the key difference here.
Is this why Zelensky wants Ukraine to be a big Israel?
I think that plays a role. I mean, you know that what you're saying is literally true. We both know it. He has said it in the past. Exactly. There you have it. He has said it himself. I think it's a mix. What I've just said, he wouldn't admit, right? Because you don't admit that openly, right? It's illicit. You don't admit it. You feel it, you think it, you don't say it. Although with Zelensky, you never know, right? Depends on what he's been taking. But look, you shouldn't say it. But the other reasons, of course, include that we've talked about this before. I think Zelensky sees Israel as an extremely militaristic and authoritarian state, and he loves the model. That's what he wants. Zelensky is not a Democrat. Absolutely not. It's one of the silliest tales ever told in the West.
Well, it's been circulated a lot. By the way, guys, we have an offer again by our dear friend Tarik Cyril Amar. This is a special offer. Subscribe to Tarik's Substack and you receive 20% off your new annual subscriptions. This is valid for 48 hours, which means till the 9th of November. You can see the link scrolling on the screen. The link is also in the description below. But if you are lazy to do that, you can simply now scan the QR code on the screen. There is a QR code. You can take your smartphone and just scan it, and you jump directly to his Substack subscription page. So I'm making things for you really easy now.
Brilliant.
Tarik, my friend, there is a lot ongoing on the front line in Ukraine, and one of which is in Pokrovsk and Kupyansk. Could you maybe update us what is going on? Today is Friday, the 7th of November, 2025. Have the Ukrainian forces surrendered? Are they trapped? Are they surrounded? Is there a chance for them to do a breakthrough and repel the Russian offensive? What is going on there?
So yeah, the big one, the one that is most important, is Pokrovsk, and that includes sort of a satellite town of Pokrovsk called Mirnogorod. And it has a different name in Russian. Both these towns have two different names. I use Ukrainian names now, but you will find them, Pokrovsk and Mirnogorod.
So this is Pokrovsk. This is Pokrovsk here, and this area is completely or half surrounded now.
Yes. So what has happened, and this is a very long process, right? This has intensified since the summer, but it's begun even earlier. What has happened is that, as you can see on the map, the Russian forces have almost totally encircled this pocket, right? This big pocket. What they haven't yet encircled on the ground, they control in the air. So it's not as if what you still see open on the map towards Ukraine is actually open, because it's a kill zone. It's in reality, it's a kill zone. Nobody can get through. There's enormous fire on this zone by drones and also artillery in part, right?
Yes.
So it's an effective pocket. It's an effective encirclement already. Now, you will find still some Ukrainians, not even in the military. The military, at least the lower ranks, are much more honest, interestingly enough. But you will find some Ukrainian information warriors who will still try to peddle hogwash, essentially, and pretend that this isn't an encirclement. It is an encirclement, right? And the people who are in there definitely know it's an encirclement. And by now, everybody agrees, including in the West. You get people like Colonel Reisner from the Bundeswehr in Austria. You get the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. I think I'm already getting it. New York Times. You go through it. Everybody admits that Pokrovsk is on the verge of falling to Russia. Or sometimes they formulate it even more explicitly along the lines of it's basically already fallen. It's just a matter of time until this is all fully realized and implemented. It's not just a circle, one should say, right? It's not, when you look at this map, it looks like on one side you have the Ukrainians inside the pocket and on the other you have the Russians, but that's not how it works in reality. In reality, the city has also been heavily infiltrated by Russian troops, massively. There are reasonable people who say 80% of it are already under Russian control, right? And then you have the drones and so on and so on. The situation of the Ukrainian defenders, who may be several thousand, is desperate. That is absolutely clear by now. And the real question is, and you raised it already, what happens next? Can they still get out? They can definitely no longer repel the Russians. That's absolutely impossible. But can they still get out? Can they flee? Can they escape? Or is it too late for that? Will they all either be killed or taken prisoner, right? Now, the Ukrainian leadership, both the political leadership and the military leadership, have a record of keeping things like that for far too long before allowing their troops to retreat. This has happened in places like Bakhmut in 2023. It's happened in Avdiivka in 2024. It happened also in the Kursk salient that the Ukrainians for a while established on Russian territory when the Russians took it back. Same mistake. They always wait far too long. They sacrifice a lot of their own troops, the Ukrainians, standing sort of to the last man instead of executing a retreat, which would be correct, right?
Yes.
And right now, you already have discussions inside Ukraine. You have criticism of the government as far as people can still speak up, saying, you've done this before, please don't do it again. Finally, give these people the order to leave, right? So that they don't have to desert, that they don't have to think it up all for themselves, that they can do, what a soldier loves to do, namely follow their orders and get out of there if they still can, which is
Yes.
very, very unclear anyhow. Pokrovsk is important because it opens the way to two other big cities and fortresses in the Donetsk Oblast. And when that happens, then Russia has taken another big step. It's not complete, but will have taken another big step to controlling all of that oblast, all of it, which is one of its major war aims.
Tarik, I will just show the map. I'm not claiming to be an expert on military affairs. However, this is a similar military strategy or Russia adopted similar strategy in Syria. And in Arabic, they say it's the Mitraqa strategy. And you can see, for example, this is the road. If the Ukrainians will bring any reinforcement into Pokrovsk, they have to use the M30 road, right? And the M30 road, they try to cut this road from both sides, which means that no reinforcement can arrive into the city. And this is basically turns the city into an island. And once you become an island, technically you have fallen already. This is a fallen city, and if the Ukrainians want to liberate the city again, they have to recapture the highway or the supply lines of the city for the soldiers to continue fighting and resisting or repelling the Russian attack there. Unfortunately for these soldiers, I think that with the aerial superiority of Russia, the drones and the manpower, and also cutting the supply chains on them in Pokrovsk, this definitely means two things. One of the two things, they are either going to be dead or they're going to surrender. So the decision has to be now to the Ukrainian armed forces.
Well, I mean, it's not good news. I don't think they're good news for people who are in a situation like that. But it is true that Putin himself has at least twice, I think twice, at least once, maybe I'm a bit confused, but at least once, maybe twice, Putin has made a point of publicly stating that the Russian armed forces should do their best to allow those who want to surrender to be taken prisoner and be treated humanely. Now, obviously, our Western info warriors will deny that this means anything. I actually think it means a lot. But, soldiers who are in a given unit, who are under certain commanders, they can't simply give up, even if they want to. This is all very complicated, right? So there is a little sign of hope that Putin has made a point, and this has been broadcast on the Russian news very prominently. So it's been signaled to the whole nation. He has made a point of telling his military, its top generals, that he wants people to be taken prisoner if they give up and to be treated basically well, right? The other thing I should mention, as you mentioned drones, right? You remember how for a while in this war, there was a story that the Russians are behind on drones. Only the Ukrainians can do drones, and the Ukrainians are so much more modern. And for a while, for 22, there was some truth to this, right? But by now, it's completely the other way around. And this is a very interesting aspect of the battle for Pokrovsk, which I only recently understood, which is that one reason why the Russians have made this progress in the last, sort of since summer, in the last few months around Pokrovsk, is that they have used their own drone forces very effectively and to do all sorts of things, to destroy logistics, to attack the resupply of the Ukrainians, of course, also to kill Ukrainians, but specifically to attack the drone forces of the Ukrainians. So the Russians have used their drone forces to either eliminate or suppress the drone operating units of the Ukrainians. They've been hunting them. Now, if you think about how incredibly important defense by drones still is for the Ukrainians, it really is very important to establish this kill zone, right? Where the Russians
Yes.
can move, but they're more or less likely to be hit by Ukrainian drone.
Yes.
Then the Russians figuring out a way of repressing, suppressing Ukrainian drone units is an extremely bad sign for the Ukrainians in general.
Yes.
Extremely bad sign.
True. Guys, thank you so much for following all the work we do. Many people come to the show in the live chat, and then in the comments they say those are great insights. Thank you very much, Kevork. Thank you very much, Tarik. And I think it would be we would be really grateful if you leave a like, because once you leave a like, this content reaches to a wider audience. I'm checking the statistics. We're receiving around 10,000 views on each conversation, and 10% of the people leave a like. Like, imagine if only 50% of the people leave a like, and this content will reach to tens of thousands of people. You know how YouTube's algorithm work, and that would be really helpful, and we would be also very grateful to you if you do the simple thing, and that is hit the like button. That's it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. 50% of the viewers are subscribers, and 50% are not subscribers. So they watch the content, but they don't subscribe to to the channel. That would be great, really, if you do that. Tarik, let's go to the last part of today's conversation, and that is a recent statement and article. This is by this is a foreign Financial Times exclusive by Jensen Huang, has warned that China will beat the US in the artificial intelligence race thanks to lower energy costs and looser regulations. This is the Nvidia boss, Jensen Huang. Now, I have two questions here, Tarik. Well, the first question is, why is this AI thing is considered a race between the US and China? Why should we treat it as a competition that's one party has to defeat the other side? And the second thing is, are you terrified by this competition over AI?
Yeah, obviously, but what isn't terrifying nowadays, right? Okay. So, look, why is it a competition? I'm genuinely sorry, but I think I only have a very banal answer, which is that we are still in an international system where geopolitics ultimately trumps all other concerns, and geopolitics has the ability to assimilate any new relevant technology to the competition between states, right? Look, even when after World War II, it's a very different example, but even when after World War II, television became a mass thing, right? The first television precursors actually occurred before World War II. Even the Nazis had a tiny bit of television, but nothing compared to what came later. But after World War II, after World War II, that's when television really boomed, and it became the mass phenomenon, right? That we are still living with, although by now it's digitized and different again. Yes. Even that technology was very much seen in terms of competition. I've read Soviet internal reports about Western TV, about American TV, about West European TV, and they're very much couched in terms of competition. This is what they can do. This is how many people they reach. We have to have something that's a counterweight. We also have to have efficient television. Ideally, we would reach them, blah, blah, blah. If you look at a case like the two Germanys, right, West and East Germany during the Cold War, there, the fight over and by means of television was very direct and very intense, right? So you name it. It's not just radar or nuclear technology. Almost any technology that in any way can be turned into power will be turned into power. And that is unfortunately very much the case for AI. Very much, right? If you ever want to build entirely unmanned, completely unmanned human beings out of the loop weapon systems, you will need some form of AI, for instance, right? So why it's a competition, you can see that. But even in peacetime, whoever cracks the better AI faster will, of course, dominate economically, right? Even in peacetime. What I found interesting about Wang's intervention, right? It's really funny. First, the FT had this thing, this text that you mentioned, this report, and then he sort of took it back and said, "Oh, I didn't say that they can actually overtake us. I really said, or I meant to say that we have to keep being ahead of them." Right?
So, what is he ethnically? What is he ethnically?
I don't know.
Oh.
I should.
But he's Asian. I will check. I will
Yes,
check because
in some manner, but I
really
really
funny.
don't know. But look, what I found really interesting, and that's a point that is not reflected in the way they titled the story in the FT or later. He says something very curious. Yes, there is the point about cheap energy. He says, well, their AI development, their AI companies get really cheap energy, and that's why they will beat ours in the original version. And he says they have fewer regulations. What he means by that, of course, is very sinister. He means they can use the data of immense populations with even fewer restraints than we, right? He wants to say. But what I really found interesting is that what he's really angry about is that in the latest truce between Trump and Xi over trade matters, there was a hope that Trump would permit the export, the sale of the most powerful Nvidia chips in and to China again, which is not permitted at the moment, right? And what Wang is really saying, when you read this text carefully, is he's saying, by not giving them our best chips, we are making them stronger. And although it's obvious that he's pursuing his own interest, right? He wants his company to legally be allowed to sell more of the stuff to China again. Okay, fine. But I think in this case, what he perceives as his own interest coincides with reality. I think he's right about this. I think he's right. What he's essentially questioning is the logic of sanctions. In this case, technology sanctions, chip sanctions, to be precise. He's basically saying, look, by not giving them our best chips, we are forcing them, first of all, to develop their own. And secondly, we are forcing them to build all their new systems based on their own chips. Now, if we kept exporting our stuff, their incentive to catch up with us would be lower, maybe, and they would still be using our technology and building it into their systems, which is an advantage for us. That's what he's really implying in this statement. And that, to me, was the most interesting part and the one where I think he's right. But that you can generalize this. The West has a genius now for using aggressive sanctions economic warfare that in the end makes the targets stronger, not always, but often. Look at Russia, brilliant example, and makes the West either directly weaker, like the effects of the Russia sanctions on the Europeans, or simply relatively weaker because the West is incentivizing their opponents or potential opponents, their rivals, to get stronger.
Yes. By the way, our moderator says all Chinese companies get everything. That's what central planning socialism does. Companies get intel, subsidies, workers, universities, data, and tech and research and development capitalism cannot compete with that. So there is a state sponsorship also, or
It's a
centralized
very
power.
system. Yeah. Look, let me put it like this. If the Chinese had not reformed their system from the 1970s, 76 is often given as, I think, the most important single year, under Deng Xiaoping at first, right? If they had not reformed it and hadn't created a hybrid, I think they have a hybrid now between socialism, communism, and capitalist methods. They have created a hybrid, which the Soviets never managed to do. If the Chinese hadn't done this, I think they may have failed completely, like the Soviets. What has made China so incredibly successful is the enormous pragmatism. It's the enormous pragmatism, if that's the right word. I'm not even sure it's the right word. But what I'm trying to say by this is that they put the interests of the country first, and then they combined things that we associate, with different ideological paradigms. and they just didn't care. They
Yes.
did care. But from our perspective, it's inconsistent. From their perspective, it's incredibly successful, right?
Yes.
But there is another aspect to this, which is less ideological, it's almost sociological. And I think we've talked about this before. There is a saying, and I think it's an American saying. America is run by lawyers. And that's almost literally true. If you look into American elites, most of them by now, legal education.
Mm.
China is run by engineers. And that is also almost literally true. You can count it. If you look at who's actually running the state up and down, it's engineers or similar types. And you can really read off that China has an enormous capacity to make collective, or we would perhaps say public efforts, building enormous bridges, building the Belt and Road project, which, by the way, a lot of people said was dead, and it's doing really well again, as even the FT and the Economist have just acknowledged. China has a genius for public projects, for doing things for the common weal. Maybe they don't get it always right. I'm not saying they're, perfect, but that's their aim. Whereas the United States is completely bereft of that. All the United States can do by now is each man for himself and woman and anything else.
I will end up this conversation with you, Tarik, with a video. You remember this video of this journalist asking a question to the European Union? Let's share the story for the audience later. Let's listen to this first.
You have been repeating several times that Russia should repay for the reconstruction of Ukraine. Do you believe Israel should repay for the reconstruction of Gaza, since they have destroyed almost all the strip and the civilian infrastructures? Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriele. It's definitely an interesting question on which I would not have any comment at this stage.
You have been.
So, guys, what happened is that this guy asked a question, and I think this is a legitimate question. And he dared to ask the European Commission this logical question: if Russia must pay to rebuild Ukraine, shouldn't Israel pay to rebuild Gaza? And the spokesperson said she had no answer for it. But this journalist, Gabriele Nunziati, now lost his job for asking a question, basically.
Asking a question.
He didn't even share his opinion. He just asked the question, didn't even share his opinion.
And a very moderate one, because he could have put it much more brutally. He could have said, what Israel has done to Gaza is much, much worse than what Russia has done to Ukraine. And that is true. That's objectively true. I will accept nobody telling me that I'm pro-Russian by saying that that's an empirical thing. You can actually quantify this fact. What Israel has done to Gaza, and not only Gaza, right? We also have the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, and so on, Yemen. What Israel has done to Gaza, Iran, is much worse than what Russia has been doing to Ukraine, very clearly. And we live in this perverse world where we pretend in the West that we assess what states and their elites do by some sort of objective value criteria, but we are hypercritical about it. And it's not only that we are hypercritical, because hypocrisy is not that unusual in politics. It's how blunt it has become.
Yes.
How incredibly blunt, right? If you're Israel, you can commit a genocide and we'll help you. That's what we've done. That's what the West has done, literally. Israel has committed, and by the way, is still committing a genocide. There is no real ceasefire, and we help. If you're Russia, then we will insist on the letter of international law. And you're not committing a genocide. Don't get me wrong. You can argue about a number of things where you can say Russia is committing this and this crime under international law, war of aggression, which the West also commits habitually, for instance. But one thing is very clear: Russia is not committing a genocide. No. And I'm not agreeing with sort of liberal lefty on the fence sitters who want to show how great they are by saying, like, I'm against Russia and against Israel. You can be against Russia and against Israel at the same time if you want to, but don't pretend they're the same. Russia is not the same. It's a totally different dimension. Israel is by magnitudes, orders of magnitudes worse.
I just found this journalist, Gabriele Nunziati, on X, I will follow him and I will send him an invitation if he would like to join our next show next Friday. That would be fun because he is apparently not some sort of pro-Russian person. I'm just checking his account now. He is against the Russian offensive against Ukraine. And at the same time, he is against the Israeli onslaught against the Palestinians in Gaza. I mean, he's retweeting for Francisca Albanese. And at the same time, retweeting for, what was her name? Ursula von der Leyen. So that would be really interesting to have him. I will definitely follow him. And if he follows me back, I could send him a DM. Let's have him on the show. Let's have a conversation about the state of affairs inside the Commission of the European Union and these double standards that is still ongoing there. That would be really interesting. Tarik, my dear friend, thank you so much for coming to the show again. My friends, Tarik is a regular guest every Friday. We do this show, Cold War 2.0, at 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. If you like this content, over 400 people are watching this. That would be amazing if you hit the like button, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and go to the description and check Tarik's Substack. You can check. There is a special offer for Tarik. You can receive 20% off of your annual subscription for the next 48 hours. And I will see you on Monday, and we will come again with Tarik and do the 32nd episode next Friday. So thank you so much, Tarik. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in, whether you watch this on YouTube or on Rumble. And a big thank to our friend Red Access for moderating the live chat, and all the thanks also to you guys for tuning in, and I will see you on Monday. Peace.
See you. Bye-bye.